I've lived with my mom and younger sister for a little over 3 years now. My dad passed away, and while it's not been easy for us after his death, we've managed. See, my grandmother, she's actually really sick and needs some help with bills, plus there's the possibility of her staying over here with us. Don't get me wrong, I love my grandmother, but there are the facts to weigh, yet my uncaring aunt does not want to take any of this into consideration. Plus, there's the little show that I'm sure she's displaying to avoid taking responsibility for my grandma. Currently, my mother works 2 jobs. We own a laundromat of some sort, and I help out there all the time. While at night, she works as an online bookie. I'm not entirely sure what her other job entails, but it does pay the bills and puts food on the table. My younger sister, Caitlin, is in her junior year of high school. She's leaning towards the arts and even has a few songs written already. I recall her singing to a beat a few months ago, and what I heard was pretty cool. Imagine the shock I felt when I discovered that it was not an already existing song, but something she wrote herself. I really hope my mom and I will raise up enough money to take my sister to an institution so she can further develop her talent. I've ruled out every possibility of attending college or any institution myself. Thankfully, it's not something I was ever interested in. So instead, I'll earn a tech skill or something during my free time. After all, it's one of the huge money makers in today's economy. Technology, man. My grandma just got out of the hospital after a major heart surgery. She's been in and out of the hospital given her heart problems and age. I heard my mom mention that her old age was affecting her as well, but I didn't bother going into detail to learn more. She had made a request to stay with a family member this time around. I'll explain why soon enough. Anyways, we tried contacting my aunt since she was better off and could house my grandmother without any trouble. Guys, she had not been reachable in the beginning, and when my mom finally managed to reach her, it was very annoying to hear that, it was what she told my mom. Right, I was meant to talk about the reason why my grandmother did not want to stay with a nurse or a better trained professional. Ever since my grandma's various health conditions began, we've been employing various nurses to stay with her in her home, which is pretty far from where I live. It's almost a 3-hour drive. 2 of the nurses we had employed to take care of the grandmother were negligent, and the last one kept forgetting to give my grandmother her medication. My mom had noticed this when she visited last, but it was too late. We fired the nurse, but my grandmother still ended up in the hospital. So even if my grandmother wasn't against the idea of hiring a nurse, I was sure my mom would have objected. I can only imagine how she must have felt after her last discovery. I can't imagine going to my mom's place and seeing her being ignored by the person who was supposed to take care of her. I would lose my mind. Well, a few days ago, right before my grandmother was discharged from the hospital, my sister had gone to see my aunt Natalia. I just realized that I have not said much about her. She's my mom's sister-in-law and the younger sister of my late father. She's also my grandmother's favorite child, and in the beginning I thought it was because of some exceptional trait that she had. When my dad was alive, he favored my younger sister because she was good at school. He did not ignore me and gave me all that I needed, but guys, it was obvious that Caitlin had his heart more than I did. Aunt Natalia did not have much to her, and had a horrid character. My sister did not see anything wrong with her, but then again, she had not had as many encounters as I did with Aunt. I'm sure that my mom herself just tolerated my aunt because she usually muttered to herself after visiting that woman. Aunt Natalie is what grandmother calls a miracle baby, so that must be the reason for the treatment that she gives to somebody so undeserving. After my grandmother had given birth to my dad, she and my late grandfather kept trying for another baby for 12 years. My mom would tell me that she learned that my grandmother almost had given up on having another child, and then Natalia came along and it attracted me to my aunt for some time. Well, and then I learned the kind of person that my aunt really was the very hard way. One time when I was 14 years of age, I visited my aunt. My mom mentioned something about Aunt Natalia needing someone to help out in the house because of some new project that was taking all her time. And since I was on a holiday and still thought my aunt was a decent person, I decided to go. My aunt, like my grandmother, does not live close by, so I was well aware that I would not be running back to my home whenever I felt like it. Long story short, my aunt turned me into her housemaid. I did almost everything, and I'm sure that if I was a bit older, I would have been in charge of the cooking as well. There was a little of that even. Cleaning, errands, and any given time, there was yelling in my face whenever I made a simple mistake. By the time I got home, I was malnourished and exhausted, and my view of my aunt had taken a drastic turn for the worse. I could say a lot of mean things about my aunt that would make anyone dislike her, but that's not my aim here. I'd rather tell stories truthfully and let anybody who hears me judge on their own. You know how we have those girls in movies who think they're better than everyone else? That's my aunt, a woman in her late 20s who thinks that the world revolves around her. She's not exceptionally smart and, like I said earlier, has no talent I know of. Then there's the fact that my grandmother handed her everything she owed on a silver platter. The house my aunt lives in, the job she currently owns, and at some point the money that she had were all given to her by my grandmother. It's something that disgusts me because I know for sure that my aunt would have nothing to her name if not for my grandmother. And I know for sure that I'm not the only one who feels that way in my entire family. So, I didn't tell my parents because I didn't want to cause any unnecessary issues between my family and my aunt. Now, there's the matter at hand. My grandma would have to move out of the hospital soon, and my aunt has been unreachable for days. My mom will simply be paying her a visit tomorrow to know what exactly the issue with her is, because my grandmother is worried about my aunt. I'm almost positive that Aunt Natalia is doing all this on purpose. I poured out my thoughts to my mom, and she told me that it was all in my head. Then again, she has not lived with my aunt, so I don't blame her for thinking the way that she did. Let's see what happens at the end of my mom's visit to my aunt. I really hope I'm wrong. I will update you guys soon. Update number 1. My grandmother is staying with us now. I've actually never lived with her before, but my family has paid her numerous visits, and I won't lie and say that it's not stressful taking care of my grandma, but it's worth it. I hope I actually get used to it and on time because I feel guilty about how I'm currently feeling. I don't want to feel reluctant when I have to take care of my grandmother. I'm working part-time at the laundromat, going on interviews, learning tech skills, and just taking care of the home at night because my mom knocks out every single night after doing God knows how many taxes. My sister keeps trying to help, but there's only so much that she can do, and that's either at night or on the weekends. I don't know how else to explain myself without telling a white lie or sounding like a lazy human being. I just hope my plight is understandable. So, did anything come out of the mom's visit to my aunt? Yes, it did. It so happened that my aunt was sick and did not inform anyone about it because she did not want to be a bother. Do I buy that? No, I don't. Maybe she was feeling under the weather for some time, but the part about not wanting to be a bother is what keeps convincing me that something is wrong with the story that she told. But that's not all, by the way. My aunt had also told my mom that she would come to get my grandma in a week when she's feeling better. It's been 2 weeks now and still no word from my aunt, and I'm not really surprised. Aunt Natalia is not somebody I'd exactly put my money on. The only downside is having to see my grandmother lament about how much she misses my aunt. She herself has tried calling Aunt Natalia, and it had only gone through the first time. There was even a time when my grandma called me to sit down beside her, and I composed and sent a text to my aunt based on my grandmother's words. It really breaks my heart to see my grandmother in this state, and no matter what I or Kate do to make her feel better, she always returns to default. And trust me when I say that a sad old woman is not easy to ignore. Even I, despite my strong disliking for my aunt, have tried contacting her. I called, I texted, and I even looked through her social media just in case there was an off chance for my grandmother to be happy after hearing from or about her. But nothing. Call me a horrible niece for thinking this, but what kind of daughter doesn't see their sick mom who keeps trying to maintain contact? It's things like this that really convince me that my aunt is purposely avoiding my grandmother and my entire family. Is it so hard to leave a message or call to check up on her mother? I could keep ranting and raving about this, but all I want is for my grandmother to be happier. Does anybody have any advice on how I can go about that? Update number 2. Hey guys, my aunt finally visited, and I wish that she had not, because now my grandmother feels worse than she initially did. She would randomly break down in tears because of my aunt's new condition, and even if I felt bad for my aunt. So Aunt Natalia visited from the hospital during the weekend, and she's now wheelchair-bound. I'm not entirely sure what happened because I saw her moments before she left the house, but when I asked, my mom told me that Aunt Natalia had fallen down the stairs and, well, hurt both of her legs. It was during this time when she was initially sick, and while I saw a cast on just one of her legs before she left the house, I still felt very bad for my aunt. And for the first time, I actually hoped for good things to happen to her. On a slightly lighter note, it's becoming easier for me to take care of my grandmother. I know I said that it was difficult in the beginning, but that was me trying to adapt to doing it at once. My mom works at the laundromat in the morning, and during that time I would study and practice my coding. Now, I do that while taking care of my grandma. I had to move the plastic desk and a chair to her room, and she told me that she likes my company. It's also pretty nice and comical to hear her talk about technology because she seems so fascinated by it. By the time it's mid-afternoon, my mom and I will switch, and I'll stay at the laundromat till 8 at night. Kate watches Grandma while she does her homework or whatever, and Mom works while I take a break. I'm so glad that I managed to perfect this routine. My grandmother made me call my aunt every night ever since her visit, and to my surprise, she's been taking her calls, making me question myself because I was initially certain that Aunt Natalia was playing games with my family, but maybe she really was just sick. Maybe she really fell down those stairs, and maybe she did not want to be a bother to my family. It's a hard pill to swallow, but I'll admit that I was wrong. There is one thing that's been on my mind for some time, and it's the only thing that's currently convincing me that my aunt really is lying to all of us. I'll also let this out because I just might be overthinking again and need to say these things for my thoughts to be realigned. Yesterday evening, I called my aunt for my grandmother to speak, and of course, usually, after Grandma is done speaking with Aunt, I'll end the call almost immediately. But as I left my grandmother's room, I accidentally hit the speaker instead of ending the call, and I heard a man say, and I quote, "I wonder how she keeps buying your lie." Then a feminine laugh, but of course, what came next was a curse word, and the line going dead. When I got to my room, I was convinced that my ears were lying to me, but the more I thought about it, the more convinced I was that my aunt was tricking us in some way. How is the question I've yet to answer, but it doesn't matter. I'll be telling my mom about this tomorrow, and I'll try to convince her to go to my aunt's house unannounced. Maybe she'll see something that will explain everything to me. Is this a bad idea? It was late at night, and I was pretty tired, but I knew Aunt Natalie more than most of the people in the house. Now that I'm letting this out, maybe it's my dislike for my aunt that's making me feel this way. Anyways, I'll get to know for sure after my mom goes for her visits. Update number 3. Hey guys, I'm back with another one. So, I was right. I'm glad that's the case, but I'm the only one who sees it. Not even my mom believes me, and I need them to stop treating me like I'm crazy or just plain evil. I can't blame them because it's all Aunt Natalie's fault. I'll be getting back to her as soon as I come up with a plan to do so. But what she has done will not go unpunished. I don't care less about the fact that she's older than me at this point. I really can't. Now, I managed to get my mom to visit my aunt again, but it did not go as planned. I don't know if she heard me when I told her to go without informing my aunt, or if she ignored me because she knew it wasn't basic courtesy. But my aunt knew my mom was going over to her place. It was annoying when I found out that tiny detail later on, but the damage had already been done. My mom had agreed to come over after my constant cajoling, and not because I told her what I'd heard after my grandma's call with my aunt. She brushed it off, even saying that I was hearing things. Like, I hadn't come to the conclusion myself. I was over the moon when she eventually decided to head over to my aunt's place, but my joy came crashing down when I got into trouble afterward. My mom had returned from my aunt's place, and when I'd rushed out to meet her, I knew something had gone wrong because she kept just staring at me sternly. It was quite unsettling, and no matter what I did, she did not tell me what happened. Later, during dinner, my mom told me that Aunt Natalia wanted to have a video chat to address everyone because she could not make it to the house anymore. She also did not want to inconvenience Grandma, so we decided to have the call the following day. Believe me when I tell you that it was very hard for me to fall asleep because I was worried. I could not remember the last time my mom was so cold towards me, but I did not know that the next day was going to be a bad one for me. We called Aunt Natalia on my laptop. She was still in the wheelchair, and my grandma teared up almost immediately. Aunt Natalia immediately put me on the spotlight, asking me to tell everyone what I heard. I did so, but for some reason I was shaking. I could only hope it wasn't visible. My aunt then proceeded to ask what I'd made out of what I overheard, and I could not say a word. Did she seriously expect me to tell everyone that I suspected that she was lying to everyone? She saw that I was quiet and told everybody my thoughts. My grandmother looked surprised to hear that I thought my aunt was deceiving everyone just to avoid taking care of her. Well, as annoying as my aunt's actions were, I'd given her one solid thought. She said my thoughts aloud perfectly, and I don't know if my mom had told her or if it was because my aunt knew that I knew the truth. But you know what? It did not really matter. Everyone now knew that exactly what I believed, especially since I did not bother denying it. The next thing my aunt did shocked me, and that's one of the reasons I'm hell-bent on getting back at her. She asked me to tell everybody why I thought what I did, like I would actually say something. Did she really expect me to announce to my family that I knew she was faking it because she was one of the most self-centered, irresponsible people I've ever met in my life? I just kept quiet. When it was obvious that I wasn't going to do or say anything, my aunt proceeded to tell everybody that I wanted to paint her as the bad guy, on purpose, because I myself wanted my grandma to leave the house. I opened my mouth to protest, but when my aunt said that it was what my mom had told her, I became quiet almost immediately. My mom's face was expressionless when I looked at her, and that's when I remembered what I had told my mom before my grandmother started living with us. I'd mentioned how stressed out I was at everything that was going on in my life, and asked if there were alternates to my grandma living with us. It was clear at that point that I did not want my grandmother to live with me, and now my aunt, who knows this, is using it against me. Now, I wish I had said something to explain myself and my words, but then I was so furious that my mouth could not even say any comprehensible things. My grandmother had turned around to leave, and my sister had joined her, but not before I'd seen her disappointed look. My mom apologized to my aunt on my behalf and ended the phone call. She berated and chastised me before leaving me all alone in the living room, torn between crying and yelling at everybody in anger. So, the next day, I calmed down and tried talking to my grandmother, but my mom had told me that she would be taking care of her full time before putting me in charge of the laundromat. I spent the next few hours clearing my things from my grandma's room, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not get through to either my mom or grandma. Even Kate refused to listen to me for the length of time I needed her to, telling me that I'd done a bad thing and needed to set things right. And yes, at some point I cried out in frustration. Living in a house where all the people you love ignore you is far from tolerable. I intended to set things right, and now that I know what it is I have to do, nothing will stop me. Thankfully, my family could not care less about my whereabouts now that they're all mad at me, which is the only thing I have to my advantage. I just hope my endeavor won't be in vain. And if after everything I'm in the wrong, I will apologize to my entire family, including my aunt. That's a promise I made to myself, guys. Go ahead. Wish me luck. Update number 4. I'm so happy that I doubt I'll be able to type out everything I want to at once. I managed to convince everybody at home that I was right about Aunt Natalia, and that things were okay again. I almost did not succeed because there were some annoying obstacles, but now that my family doesn't see me as the black sheep anymore, I can only wait and watch what happens next. My grandmother is furious, and while I don't like the state that she's in, I'm partially glad because she'll teach me annoying aunt a lesson without any form of remorse. The plan was to go to my aunt's house myself and get at least a recording that proved that she was faking her condition. I had called her with a friend's number twice, pretending to be a sales agent, and I was lucky to have heard footsteps as she yelled in my ear. It was not enough to prove that she was deceiving anyone, so I decided to pay Aunt Natalia a visit as well, without her knowledge this time, and the problem was finding the time to actually do so because I could not just leave my mom's laundromat unattended during the day. The first night during my attempt to sneak out, my mother informed me that my grandmother wanted to speak to me. It had been over a week since I had a proper conversation with my grandma, so I had to cancel my plans. I wish I had not done that. But at the same time, the diversion was a blessing in disguise because I later learned that my aunt wasn't even in the state of the initial date of execution. So the meeting with grandmother was a very frustrating one. For a lack of a better word, I did not know what to do when she kept asking why I wanted to paint my aunt as the one at fault. And when I was tired of remaining silent, I tried to explain myself. But it was pointless. My grandma thought I was determined to make my aunt look like a bad person in front of her, and I wasn't going to say anything else to change her mind. I'd get evidence to prove that I've been right all along, and that would hopefully do the speaking for me. Eventually, I'd get the opportunity to sneak out. It was on a weekend, so Kate was home, and I begged her to watch the laundromat for a while. I went out on some quick errands, and she begrudgingly agreed. At that point, our relationship was better, but it wasn't how it used to be. Sometimes, Kate would just forget that she was mad at me and would be all friendly until she watched an interaction between me and my mom or grandmother. I'd say the reason she had not totally forgiven me at that point was because I had not fixed my relationship with either of them. The next obstacle to face was getting to my aunt's place and back to my home before anybody suspected a thing. It wasn't easy in the slightest, especially since she lives far from us, and while I was in a taxi, I almost cursed out the driver in frustration, but managed to get in there in record time. And you won't believe what I saw, unless you believe, well, everything I've been convinced of. My aunt had left her window open, which made me wonder if she wasn't aware of the existence of burglars and animals. Well, it did make my job a bit easier, but it made me wonder how she survived living alone if she forgot to do something as basic as closing up at night. Once again, it could be my dislike for her speaking. After all, she could have just left the window open for a reason, and after doing a little peeking, I confirmed that my aunt was not only walking, but she was celebrating some cool cash that she got from grandmother with her boyfriend. I could not see them from where I was, but the audio quality was so excellent. When I was done recording, what I felt enough was I went over to the window in the backyard and caught my aunt and her boyfriend drinking and laughing. A few pictures did the trick and I left for the house. I did get home late and my mom caught me, but after showing her everything on my phone, she let me go to bed without another word. And by noon the following morning, my grandmother was aware of everything, and boy did she rant and rave like I said earlier. I'm just waiting to see the drama unfold, and guys, I'll definitely keep you updated. Update number 5. My aunt finally confessed to the family. She said that she wanted nothing to do with my grandmother and was more than ready to fake anything as long as grandma was not under her care. It was a bit of a harsh reality, but at least she was truthful. It's safe to say that Aunt Natalia is now homeless, jobless, and single. My grandmother called her lawyer and spoke to her, and within a week my aunt was homeless and had no assets in grandmother's will. The best part was that my aunt did not know this until she was visited by the lawyer. And the day after that, she barged into my home, demanding to see Grandma. And by barged, I mean literally. She must have forgotten that she was, to be in a wheelchair, and thankfully, I was around to watch the drama unfold. A few insults and slaps were involved before my aunt's confession. She had tried to lie her way through my grandma's accusation, and when Grandma had asked me to show my aunt the picture I took, Aunt Natalia was left stunned. Eventually, her face morphed into one of pure rage, and she tried to hit me but got slapped instead. And after her confession, my grandma warned her to stay away from the family just to avoid jail time. It was quite a sight watching my proud aunt beg grandmother for forgiveness, but grandma was not having it. She had instructed me to call my mom and call the police, and my aunt left soon after. Kate was the one who told me that my aunt's boyfriend had ended things with her. I don't even know how she knows that, but I'm glad that's the case. People like Aunt Natalie need to be dealt with using an iron fist. And now the best part of it all. Grandma handed the house over to my mom. It was quite a shocker. But after discussing everything, we decided it's what was best for all of us. Not only did we have to worry about rent, but we lived closer to our grandmother's old home. She'll be with us for a while before moving back, and it's a safer and better neighborhood, and there was an art school close. Kate's really excited about it, and I'd say the only downside was having to close down the laundromat. But Grandma assured us that there were a lot of people who were willing to pay handsomely for our services. We could even start up and expand our own by getting a place for the laundromat. Things are finally looking up for my family. As for me, I'm just 2 months away from completing my tech classes, and hopefully I'll get some rich clients in my new neighborhood. Anyways, thank you for listening.